Hi folks, Steve here. I just want to say a couple of things about to be and to have. So we see a title here at the start that says For Lucy, and this is about the director. It's not actually about the star of the film, the person on the film. And I think that is interesting in that it sets up a particular attitude that, say, the film director may have had to this film, where it was really his film. It wasn't the social actor's film. And I think that is played out in interesting ways in a court case which happens after the success of this film, um, where the social actor, George Lopez, wanted actually a cut of the profits, feeling that if the film's about him, he is the one on the screen, he's the one essentially being exploited, which is kind of interesting. Now, what we're seeing here is some pretty incompetent looking farmers trying to herd some cattle, and it is clearly winter, it's blistery weather, it's snowing, it looks cold and pretty darn miserable outside, and now we're looking at outside from inside in this shot, and we're in an empty, packed up classroom with not one, but two turtles, which the other turtle will appear momentarily. And I think what's really interesting is the way the film is saying some things about the environment and the classroom. That we start outside, we start in the blistery winter. We don't start in session in the classroom. And it's the way that the film is speaking to the environment and making some arguments and some dialogue about education and the way that education has a place in the environment. And there you have a shot of the world. Interestingly, a point of view shot from the turtle, where it doesn't break, it doesn't sort of say that the classroom is something that's separated from the real world, that the classroom is actually part of the real world and it's part of the environment and it's part of nature, and it's an important thing. And you should think about that in regard to the argument that the film is actually making about education and what it's actually doing, and why this film was used in France as a political tool to gain funding for education, to gain funding for a particular type of education, which is that one-to-one form of education. And yes, I'm aware it's a little ironic that here I am in a online format talking to you about the importance of the one-to-one teacher engagement, when clearly we're probably not together when you're listening to this. What's interesting about the opening is the way that it sets up the style of the film, and that we get a sense of what this film is. This film is setting up long takes, static shots, minimal action, and that's what you get in this film. And you get it in the opening, and the way that the opening sets up the way of thinking about how this film is going to play out, and how this film is talking about its environment and really the myths of the country. That slow, natured, more relaxed, less frenetic attitude or myth that the classroom or the countryside has. What's interesting is the lack of exposition that we have. Unlike other modes of documentary, there is no voiceover to explain what is happening, who the people are. Right? There's no titles here of who the people are. And I think that's kind of interesting. The way the film is essentially encouraging us. It's saying, come along with us. You will learn about these people, but you have to come along for the ride. And that's what it's doing. And we're now in the school bus basically collecting all of these students from various locations around the countryside, and we're driving them into the classroom. And I think it is important that the slow pace of the film reflects the way of life in this community. The film itself is very quiet, but with non-diegetic classical music used during the shots of the countryside. And think about that, why it's using classical music over the top and the way that it's setting up a particular way of thinking about the countryside and thinking about these people and thinking about the romanticism of really what we're seeing here, the romanticism of the old way of teaching, the old style of teaching, and why this film had a particular impact with certain people who were watching it. I think the mode of address here, it also signifies a sort of a serious and a traditional perspective, which is really aimed at an older audience. If you think about who would really enjoy this film, it's an older audience. People who may enjoy foreign films, people who may be in positions of power themselves, people who may be teachers themselves. So I'll be interested to know what you think about this film and its mode of address and its sort of that slow-paced nature, if you think that actually works. It's a good case study of the observational documentary techniques that Bill Nichols talks about. And this is a little bit unusual in contemporary documentary film. You don't actually see a film like this anymore. I mean, of course, there are some films, but films today, especially documentaries, it has that Netflix kind of quick fire, quick editing idea where things are moving very rapidly and they're really saying you have to be kind of on the edge of your seat. If you think of the Michael Moore style of filmmaking, that's often the way that Netflix are constructing their films. There's a sense that because it's an observational documentary and it's a foreign language film, that students may find it difficult to watch. So I'll be interested to know what you have to say about that and about the slowness of this. Now, the director has stated that he didn't want the film to be didactic, which is really explanatory, and he wanted the film to speak for itself. But like I said, it has been used as a political tool to gain funding for education in France. And the real question here is, does the film persuade you? Does the film persuade you that this style of teaching, this type of teaching is really important? If you look at the camera, we're now in the classroom, and the camera tends to be positioned at the student's eye level, meaning that the teacher is often out of frame. Although he's the focus of the film, although he's the star of the film, there you go, he's not, you can't even see his head in this shot. He has to come down to the student's level. And I think that's really important in creating an empathy with the students, and we're really watching the world through them. And that's really interesting. If we look at the structure of the film, and it will continue across the whole narrative, is you get particular extracts which set up the organisation of the film as a whole. So the overarching structure of the seasons, beginning in autumn and winter, and then you kind of get this rhythm to the film, which is like the school day and the microstructure of the order of the shots. The countryside, which cuts to the classroom, which cuts to the countryside, which cuts to the student's home. This is all there in the opening, in the very opening of the film. It's also interesting, and you see it even in these opening shots, which is the characterization, which is the school teacher and the way that certain students are chosen as the focus of the film, right? Certain students are privileged over others, which creates a specific representation of the school and the village as a source of identification for the audience. We start to identify with particular students, and we start to go along on their journey, on their narrative. Now, just the final thing I'll say here is George Lopez, the school teacher, who of course sued the filmmakers because when the film became very successful and the filmmakers went on and basically launched a successful career on the back of this movie, he was left without much. He wasn't given a profit of the profits. He wasn't given a cut of the money that they made. And he felt that it was in his rights to actually earn something. And I'm interested in what you think about that, whether you think the social actors should be paid. They were paid like that in Hoop Dreams, but at the same time, they're not actors. This is not their job. His job is not to be in a documentary. His job is to be in the classroom, and the documentary was there for the bigger idea of and the bigger context of the classroom and education and this style of education. This one-to-one education. Just something I'll leave you with is the way there's been some criticisms with the film, and I'm interested in what you have to say about that. Some say it sort of has these accusations of nostalgia, that it presents rose-tinted view of this particular way of life. And the debate over the meaning of the film illustrates the way that different audiences can have different interpretations. And I think that's what's quite interesting about this film. And this is evident more in the depiction of George Lopez, the teacher, than any other. Some may see him as a sort of a kind, benevolent teacher, sort of that old mythical teacher in the classroom. But others have really criticised him as being authoritarian, old-fashioned, at times unfeeling and quite cold-natured. And I'll be really interested to know how you interpret this teacher and what you think of this teacher. Think of the pace of the film, the style of the film, the way it's trying to persuade you to a particular way of a particular style of teaching. All right, I'll leave it there. Look forward to hearing what you have to say.